Hey everyone, welcome to the CyberHub Engage podcast. It is Friday, December 6th, 2019. It's Friday. It's a few weeks before Christmas. Really, next week's the last full working week of the year for everyone. So this Friday, I decided to bring on a very special guest for our Friday wrap-up. A big supporter of our show, one of our newer sponsors. I've got Dan DeCloss, the founder and CEO of PlexTrac. Dan, welcome to the Friday wrap-up. Thank you so much for your support.
Hey, yeah, no problem. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I'm so psyched about this because, these guys didn't hear our conversation beforehand, but we have so many different ways to go. But this week has been a unbelievable kind of week. I always feel like cybersecurity stories vary from cybersecurity to privacy to government, to regulation, to a lot of it. And kind of the kickoff for this week was the FBI officially letting people know that any smart TV with a microphone can listen, a camera can watch, and an internet connection can send and receive signals. What do you do to really kind of keep your smart TVs in bayonet check? And what are some things, kind of people can do around smart TVs? Because they're not going anywhere.
Right, yeah, and I mean, smart TVs are great and they're convenient. With the amount of apps and things that we now have for streaming all the different types of services, so it's definitely not going away. And being able to have a little bit more connectedness to the services that we all know and love. But in terms of like protecting your privacy and things like that, I think it's important to always have those types of devices segmented off of your home network from other areas in the network that are going to be housing your personal data, so that if an attacker does take hold of those devices, they have still a few more steps to get to your crown jewels of your home. And then I think using different email accounts for those services that you log into than other email accounts that you would normally use for say your banking and things like that. Having just kind of separate accounts for your services is also very important. Things like that. I think also doing a good review of every time the TV updates, similar to like a computer. Anytime you get updates, going through those privacy settings and checking to make sure that you're not exposing too much information.
Sorry, we got a little audio issue.
I think that might be
okay.
Dan's end, wasn't on that.
All right, it wasn't on our end. All right. There was
Is
just
it on
a
my
little.
end?
It may have been. There was a little buzz here, so we apologize to the listeners for that slight noise. That's why we kind of all. If you're watching it, that's why my face went directly that way, because I was like looking at Micah like, what is this? And so, sorry about that. But back to smart TVs, and I mean, technology, right? It's never perfect, as much as we want to say it is. Would you hardwire your smart TV? Would you connect it through Ethernet directly into maybe your router rather than letting it sit on a Wi-Fi network?
I actually do. I mean, but I probably do it more just to make sure that the bandwidth is high enough. Sometimes the wireless router can be a little bit slower in bandwidth. But I think, having it completely segmented off in whatever capacity you need to do that is probably the most important.
So one of my concerns around this whole smart TV aspect is, if you think about it, right behind you is a TV. And in every conference room in America, in every executive office in America, there is a TV that's listening, watching. And if you've served as a CISO before, your background is from security. Before you started PlexTrac, you were on the CISO side. And so what would you advise CISOs in dealing with this alert that really could be used as espionage in the future? I mean, this data is being collected, it's being sold, but it's inevitable that this data is going to fall in hackers' hands. And if they've got conversations, meetings, habits of specific, executives in the company, it creates an easier attack vector. What would you do as a CISO to really secure your company from a smart TV perspective?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. I mean, I think from a smart TV in a conference room, you don't need to have all those services enabled. So I would definitely run through the settings and make sure that all those smart apps and everything is disabled, that you don't have anybody logging into them. you've definitely segmented them off of into their own environment, their own VLAN or network, subnetwork. So some of those simple steps just from a segmentation perspective, and then just making sure that you have some way to know that that sound, I mean, that the recording is not happening, whether that's through the TV or even like through the actual network router that it's going through. You can identify that kind of traffic when you have that kind of infrastructure, and being able to maybe just like cut off that type of bandwidth from a quality of service perspective. So if it's not necessary, just don't let it be propagating through your network.
So as we kind of look at, we kind of transition from this FBI story, I really want to go into kind of a story that we spoke about earlier today, which is, and I almost feel like I'm always talking about the Google Play in the App Store. And I want to say specifically the Google Play Store, because for whatever reason, it seems like Apple's kind of like the more strict App Store, and Google just lets every piece of junk come on there. And so how do you begin to manage that? You in your past, obviously you were a pen tester for mobile apps. People download mobile apps on their devices without really checking who they are. That extra step of checking, you're really not going to change consumer behavior from the immediate gratification of downloading something. So how do you start really addressing that aspect of it?
Yeah, I think from an enterprise perspective, you really do have to have a good handle on your mobile device management program, whether that's utilizing third-party services to actually install onto employee phones or devices. Definitely not letting phones and devices onto your public or your production network, and definitely cutting them off of access to that and having them isolated onto their own guest network or something like that. But also, if you are allowing employee devices, if you're giving those devices to your employees to use, having some kind of mobile device management is vital, and even to the point where you do restrict what apps can go on there, and that you can wipe them and that you can clean them. Because yes, you're absolutely right. Apple has a much stricter policy around what apps make it in, and they're not immune to having malware make it into the Apple Store. But Google Play has notoriously been known for just having a lot more malware and malicious apps be in its store. And they are starting to kind of make efforts to crack down on that, right? And partnering with other services to try and have better reviews of those apps. But the other aspect too is that with Android, you can get apps from lots of different sources and install them. It's a lot more of an open framework, and that's also always going to be a challenge from the mobile device management perspective.
So let me ask you this, Dan: are you an iOS or Google guy?
Yeah, I have been an iOS guy for a long time.
Okay, then we speak the same language. I was meeting with someone the other day, and they had an Android device in front of them, and I go, I'd expect more from a security guy than having an Android device.
Yeah. No, the underlying framework for Apple's iOS security is pretty solid. I've always been impressed.
It feels like from an app perspective, the creativity behind these malicious apps, even from an idea of using a standard app and then weaponizing that app through malware that downloads, that gets your credentials. Where are these vectors going? I mean, to me personally, it seems like, we know that every time we get better, they're going to get a lot better than we are sometimes. But how in the world do we start really kind of centralizing this information, and how do we share it across an industry to where, these threats become, they don't have a 6-month life expectancy, they have a 10-minute life expectancy.
So I mean, trying to get the word out as quickly as possible. I think kind of in the threat intelligence community, being able to share quickly and have the community be open to saying like, hey, we're getting hit by this, or we're seeing anomalous behavior already, and being able to get that out quickly is important. And that's the next, I think, big stride for us as an industry is continuing to improve the intelligence sharing perspective. I know people get very paranoid about not wanting to disclose that they've had an incident or a breach. So continuing to find the best ways to share that information quickly and what they're seeing in the world, so that as these things propagate, like the Mirai botnet and things like that,
Right.
So we can try and get a handle on those as quickly as possible is the next big step I think that we have to make as an industry, where people are okay doing that and not feeling like the repercussions of, oh, I'm now disclosing that I've been breached or have an incident, that we all know that's not necessarily the case. It's just we're seeing something and we want to let everybody else know, right?
It seems like a lot of these vulnerabilities are oftentimes discovered by people outside an organization, right? When in your role as a CISO, as you were running your red teams and blue teams, how are you actually identifying, internal vulnerabilities, and how much weight were you giving it to people who were outside reporting vulnerabilities to you of different systems you were using or different partners or, different third-party vendors? Because a lot of this kind of boils down to vulnerability management, right? I mean, at the end of the day, there's a vulnerability. It's either discovered, not discovered, or discovered and notified and not taken seriously, or discovered, taken seriously, patched, remediated, and so forth. How did you manage that specifically?
Yeah, I mean, and that was actually a very big impetus for PlexTrac too. I mean, we continue to do a lot of pen testing and a lot of involved security assessments, purple team assessments on a regular basis. And so any source of those reports would come in. That's how we would start to track them and make sure that we prioritize them. So having things like a prioritized risk register, a prioritized way for seeing upfront, like all the bug bounty submissions that come in, and being able to have almost like a daily stand-up where you're constantly reviewing the priority of these items to get fixed. That's vital to the vulnerability management aspects, because some things can start to slip through the cracks. And if one day you make a decision that this is a lower vulnerability, but then tomorrow another one comes out, and then you can link those two together and say, you know what, now the combination of these two makes it very serious for our environment. Then those need to be prioritized, right? So taking it at face value one day is good, and then but you need to continuously reevaluate that on a daily basis. And so having those in front of us all the time were vital, and still would be, right? So
a story I reported on Thursday around hackers stealing $1 million between a Chinese VC to an Israeli startup has me, as someone who lived in Israel for 5-6 years, and Israel being the capital of cybersecurity in the world, and China, no one hacks the Chinese. I mean, those guys are the guys doing all the work. Apparently, some guy in Hong Kong decided to mess with China, and he stole $1 million by really playing a perfectly executed man-in-the-middle attack. What are your thoughts on that specific attack? And could the CEO have done, or the VC could have done something to really catch onto this attack outside of the phone call? If your answer, Dan's, going to be pick up the phone, no, because there's got to be a better solution than actually picking up the phone.
Oh yeah, no, to me, I think it's important that when you have face-to-face meetings, that you are definitely identifying the exact protocols that you're going to do to be making those transactions, right? So even if someone does make a phone call and is fraudulent, you have a couple of out-of-band mechanisms to verify, that this is legitimate, right? And it rings true, and it hits home to me because we're a venture-backed company, and I've been very paranoid every time we initiate a transaction to make sure that we've got the right information and that's not changing, and we're not going to change it. Nobody's going to be changing this information via email or anything like that. Because it's your classic case, and we see it in the real estate market. Wire fraud, it's prevalent. So I think definitely establishing those protocols and those rules up front with every VC firm, anybody that's going to be making any kind of wire transfer, is having those out-of-band mechanisms to verify the transaction are vital.
So this kind of goes into this whole story of, one, how did the hacker know that the Israeli startup was talking to the Chinese VC? This wasn't even announced, right? So there was some sort of data leak somewhere that gave this hacker the opportunity to do it, right? And that brings a whole other aspect of, who was talking and who was saying it, right? Because I mean, this isn't PlexTrac who does business with, who has an office in this building and pays this landlord money, right? That's public domain knowledge. This was a startup talking to a Chinese VC, and typically those talks aren't really disclosed. Where do you think the hacker really got this information from? What, kind of, we're guessing here, so I'll just let all of our listeners know. We're guessing here, but that's something that's been troubling me since I've reported on this, and I've got a lot of friends in Israel, so I've been like, hey, what's the name of the company? I now know who the company is, but I won't disclose it. I've been asked, hey, out of my own curiosity, I don't want to disclose it because
sure,
poor guys, right?
Oh yeah,
especially if they're a security startup.
Right. Yeah. And that's what's tough. It's very similar to what like where we live. We've seen a lot. The real estate market is booming, and really it can't. To me, my speculation would be business email compromise. Somebody on one side of those transactions, most likely someone in the VC firm, has had their email compromised, and the attacker is just sitting there watching the emails, anticipating the day when that transaction is supposed to occur, and then starting to step in and send those emails. That would be my first speculation, is that's how it happened. Other speculations would be that they know this VC firm is going to be making, they start to profile those, what kind of investments they're making and who they're going to be reaching out to, and kind of the profile of the companies, and then either set up some kind of fake domain to start initiating email communications that way. But I think if I read it correctly,
that's what he did. That's what he did. So he had access to one mailbox. He then saw the email exchange between the two, went and bought very similar domains, copied an email with the same subject line from the original mailboxes, transferred the communication to mailboxes where he controlled everything. In fact, we posted on our website at cyberhubengage.com the email exchange where he canceled the meeting between the two in Shanghai.
I know. Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah.
I mean, that's the level of sophistication, the level of just, I want to say almost, and I mean, I know this from a perspective is when you're dealing with a VC, it's very sensitive. Someone's about to give you money. So by all means, you're never really questioning things that come through and forth because, either from the VC side, they don't want to lose the deal and seem either over controlling, over anxious, over with the company. And the company doesn't want to seem, kind of, it's that initial trust. It's that honeymoon phase of that trust. And so You're almost blindly trusting each other, and no one questioned it.
Yeah. No, I mean, and it's an extremely unfortunate event. But it's a big payoff, right, for somebody that's a couple spoof domains and having access to an email account got them $1 million, right? And so there's a lot at stake there, and so I think that's another important thing for any VC firm, any private equity firm, anybody doing large financial transactions. It's just they got to be very careful about how they set up their protocols for making these types of investments and transfers.
Also in communication, you're a Chinese VC, and mind you, we know that in China you have zero privacy, but you should have privacy outside of China. To some sort, you should have some sense of security in ensuring your communication is secured. I don't necessarily I don't want to lay blame on either, but I would expect more out of a VC than I would out of a startup.
Well, and I mean, that's easy to say, but I mean, venture capital firms, they're not necessarily cybersecurity experts, right? I mean,
not saying they are, but I'm saying they have the funds and to secure themselves as a VC, right? They have their operational fund where they can secure the most, kind of do the basics right. At the end of the day, if, as a VC, you're not doing your security basics right, what does that say about your startups? And what does that mean if you're a large VC with, 50 or 60 companies? If I'm able to get at you and then go down all your companies and be like, hey, today's the 15th, everyone's supposed to transfer something to the VC fund. And I go and I send everyone an email on the 14th at night saying, transfer it to this account. And you'd never know until, you're down millions and millions of dollars. to me, I expect more out of a VC. That's all I'm saying than a startup.
Sure. Yeah. No, I mean, one would hope, right? Yeah.
I mean, the risk exposure for a VC is in the millions and tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions, depending on the size of the VC. While a startup, for the VC, that's $1 million, right? But based on the size of the VC, and like I said, I've been given information, that's not a very big amount of money for them. That could be $25 for you and me, right?
Right.
But for the startup, that's their lifeline. That was
right.
payroll, that was rent, right. That was growth, that was marketing, that was a conference. They were counting on that money.
Yeah.
And so,
and hopefully they'll still be able to figure out a way to kind of reconcile that and still get their investment. Obviously it's not our business, but one would hope that they can still, get some additional funding to help their pipeline and roadmap. So.
We hope they didn't fail because of this, because typically a small business, 60% of them, once they've been part of a cyber attack, fail. So let's hope this company isn't part of that whole business.
Oh yeah, totally.
That's statistics. Dan, thank you so much for coming on this Friday wrap up. For everyone, thanks so much for listening. Dan will be on again in 2 more weeks, so you can submit some questions. If you've got some topics, you can go to our website or any of our social media, cyberhubengage.com. Shoot us some questions, comments, let us know what you're thinking. We'd love to be able to discuss some of your topics as well when we get together every Friday and kick off the weekend on a happy note, not just bad cyber news, but in happy notes. Hopefully every week we'll try to bring something positive from an industry that seems to thrive on negativity. Dan, thanks so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Hey, thank you. I really appreciate having me on.
All right, Micah.